Hello everybody, my name is Rainer. This is Rainier Books on December the 22nd of 2022. The day has just begun. It's 1:23 a.m. And I'm sitting here with the 10 most thought-provoking books of 2022 according to The Atlantic. Let's do this. The Atlantic is one of the papers, one of the periods, one of the periodicals that I very often turn to when I want to know what America thinks and what leading intellectuals in the United States think about foreign politics, about great issues that sort of are important for mankind as it is. And in this season of best top 10 lists or whatever, also The Atlantic has named its 10 best thought-provoking books of the year. And they say like the following thing about those 10 books. Between the covers of these books, readers will find an enormously diverse set of subjects and an array of writerly moods from the whimsical to the deadly serious. These are stories that plunge into the intimate world of farm workers in Central California, the unlikely friendship between two Asian American college students, and the machinations of modern-day authoritarians. The questions these titles pose are varied and generative. How has Ireland evolved over the past several decades? What kind of art form is the video game? What role does racism have in the health and wellness of black people? But what binds these books to one another is that in 2022, they were the ones that gave us a new way of looking, that forced us to stop and consider, that once the last page was turned, dropped us back into our lives as smarter people. And that's a lot of things about reading. Also for me, that sometimes I really feel when I read something good, I feel a little bit smarter, a day smarter in my life. We don't get a day older, we get a day smarter, we get a day better. And here are the 10 books from The Atlantic, the most thought-provoking books. The Atlantic 10, as they are called. Number 1 is G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century by Beverly Gage. The book was published on November the 22nd of 2022 by Viking. It has 864 pages and is the second longest book that I heard about actually this year. The longest being Legacy of Violence, A History of the British Empire by Caroline Silkins. This one by Beverly Gage is 864 pages, and apparently, as all Americans know, but also a lot of other people who deal with the history of the United States, J. Edgar Hoover is one of the most influential figures in modern American history, and one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century. And this book sort of, with deep research and an engaging voice and penetrating insights, it says, takes a look at the life of J. Edgar Hoover. As you might know, because when you watch the videos on this channel, I have sort of an author crush on Rachel Kushner. Such a beautiful, intelligent mind and woman. This book is exquisite and excruciating, and I will be thinking about it for years and years to come. That's Rachel Kushner's blurb to the second book of the list of The Atlantic 10. And this is a memoir from the United States. It's called Stay True, a memoir by Hua Hsu. In this book, describing the friendship of himself, his own friendship with a guy called Ken, who is a fan of Dave Matthews, like I am too, Abercrombie and Fitch and his fraternity. And Ken is a Japanese American who came to America. Hua is the son of Taiwanese immigrants, and their friendship is in the middle of this book, Stay True. They become friends and they have lots of conversations in California, live in California, successes and humiliation of college life, and then violently, senselessly, Ken is gone, killed in a carjacking not even 3 years after the day they first met. Determined to hold on to all what was left of his closest friends, his memories, Hua turned to writing and tells the story of this extraordinary friendship that ended so tragically. Stay True by Hua Hsu is the second book on The Atlantic 10. The third book was actually nominated for the National Book Award. It was also on the long list, and this is a book of short stories. It's called The Haunting of Haji, Hotak and Other Stories by Jamil Jan Kochai. And it's a collection of short stories about Afghan immigration, about Afghan people and Afghan immigration to the United States. The fourth one in this list is The Consequences by Manuel Munoz. These stories, it's also a story collection by Manuel Munoz that I haven't heard about. That's the first time I was sort of confronted with this book was by the Atlantic 10 here. Manuel Munoz has written a bunch of stories that mostly take place in the 1980s in Fresno, California, in the so-called Central Valley, which has a very special history. I once interviewed a wonderful American soccer player, a world champion of a kind, Lynn Williams, who was also born in Fresno, born and raised in Fresno. And here in Munoz's stories, we meet a lot of Mexican and Mexican-American farm workers who put food on the tables of the country, but are rounded up by the migra, as well as the quotidian struggles and immense challenges faced by their families. Difficult lives in the 80s in America, about gay immigrant, America-born and immigrant stories in this collection of short stories that is called The Consequences and was published also in October this year by Grey Wolf Press. And we go to Ireland. It was mentioned by the editors why they picked a book about Ireland, about the history of Ireland. And this is a modern history book about Ireland. It's called We Don't Know Ourselves, A Personal History of Modern Ireland by Fintan O'Toole. It's also a best book of the year in many other outlets, in the Washington Post, the New Yorker, and Foreign Affairs, and the New Statesman, and for the Chicago Public Library. And it was the winner of the 2021 Nonfiction Book of the Year award in Ireland itself. Fintan O'Toole was born in 1958. He's telling his own story, but he's also telling the story of Ireland. He was born as a working class guy in the Dublin suburbs, served as an altar boy, attended a Christian Brothers school, enthralled by American westerns, like I was when I grew up, suddenly appearing on Irish television, which I didn't, but which were not that far from his own experience, given that Ireland's main export was beef, and it was still not unknown for herds of cattle to clatter down Dublin's streets. So O'Toole is narrating this book, The History of Ireland, parallel to his own life, and this got a very great reviews in Ireland and also internationally. It's a memoir and a national history that ultimately reveals how the two modes are entwined for all of us, because also our lives are entwined with the history of the places we live in and the countries we live in. Is My Phantoms by Gwendolyn Riley, novel about a mother and a daughter. It's called a bold, heart-stopping portrayal of a failed familial bond, which brings humor, subtlety, and a new life to the difficult terrain of mothers and daughters. I have two daughters, and they have a mother, of course, and so it's why I'm a little bit more interested in these mother-daughter relationships. And here by Gwendolyn Riley in her novel My Phantoms, published in September 2022 by New York Review Books. The next one that The Atlantic is notable of the 10 books by The Atlantic is by the Polish Nobel winner Olga Tokarczuk, and this is called The Books of Jacob. Was published by on February 1 this year, translated from the Polish by Jennifer Kraft and published by Riverhead Books. And this is a story that is goes back to the mid 18th century, to Jakob Frank, to Polish Jews. And it tells the story of Frank, a real historical figure around whom mystery and controversy swirl to this day. And it's the perfect canvas for the genius and unparalleled reach of Olga Tokarczuk, who's narrating through the perspectives of his contemporaries. And she is sort of creating a world on the cusp of precipitous change, searching for certainty and longing for transcendence. One of the great authors, and this book, brick warning, is 992 pages. 992 pages. But she's a genius, Olga Tokarczuk. The next one is Spin Dictators, The Changing Face of Tyranny in the 21st Century by Daniel Treisman and Sergei Guriev. This was published in April 22 by Princeton University Press. This is a book about the great, quotation mark, great and worst dictators of the history of man in the history of mankind, about Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, but also about their sort of successors, like people like Vladimir Putin, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, who control their citizens by distorting information and simulating democratic procedures. Like spin doctors in democracies, they spin the news to engineer support. And uncovering this new brand of authoritarianism, Sergei Guriev and Daniel Treisman explain the rise of such spin dictators, describing how they emerge and operate, the new threats they pose, and how democracies should respond. This sounds so a Rainier books as it can be for a nonfiction book. Spin Dictators traces how leaders like Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew and Peru's Alberto Fujimori pioneered less violent, more covert, and more effective methods of monopolizing power, and how it works, how they spin the truth, and how they sort of get into a state where they become spin doctors dictators themselves, and how they differ from the remaining fear dictators such as Kim Jong-un and Bashar al-Assad, as well as from masters of high-tech repression like Xi Jinping in China. Offering incisive portraits of today's authoritarian leaders, Spin Dictators explain some of the great political puzzles of our time, from how dictators can survive in an age of growing modernity to the disturbing convergence and mutual sympathy between dictators and populists like Donald J. Trump. The ninth book on the list of the Atlantic 10 is called Under the Skin, The Hidden Toll of Racism on American Lives and on the Health of Our Nation. And it was written by Linda Villarosa and published on June 14 this year by Doubleday in the United States. So this is a book about race. It shows the bare forces of the American health crisis and about the health crisis that causes black people to live sicker lives and to die quicker compared to their white counterparts. Today's medical texts and instruments still carry fallacious slavery-era assumptions that black bodies are fundamentally different from white bodies. Things like that. Black people live in dirtier, more polluted communities due to environmental racism and neglect from all levels of government. It shows the impact of racism on national health in the US. Under the Skin. It's dramatic, tragic, and necessary reading. And it's the 9th of 10 Atlantic books. The final one then is another novel. It's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabriel Zevin. This is a book about friends who come together. They're often in love, but they're never lovers in the video game industry, in the video game design industry, where success brings them fame, joy, tragedy, duplicity, and ultimately a kind of immortality. Delightful and absorbing, says the New York Times. A best book of the year for the New York Times, Entertainment Weekly, Time, Goodreads, and Opera Daily. On a bitter cold day, in December of his junior year at Harvard, Sam Mazur exits a subway car and sees amid the hordes of people waiting on the platform Sadie Green. He calls her name. And these two sort of friends, intimates since childhood, who know each other so well, they created their first blockbuster game, Ichigo, together, and the world is theirs. Not even 25 years old, they are brilliant, they're successful, they're rich, but these qualities, these attributes don't save them from their own creative ambitions or the betrayals of their hearts. Spanning 30 years from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Venice Beach, California, and lands in between and far beyond, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a dazzling and intricately imagined novel that examines the multifarious nature of identity, disability, failure, the redemptive possibilities in play, and above all, our need to connect, to be loved, and to love. Yes, it's a love story, but it is not one you have read before. That's the promise by the publishers. And Gabriel Zevin's Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow concludes the list of the Atlantic 10. 10 books by the Atlantic. Some of them sound really, really interesting, don't they? Tell me if you have read one of these books. I haven't yet, but I certainly will try to get books from this list, though I won't buy them all. I might buy one of them or two of them, but I will try in the future to get more and more books by the library here in Stockholm in order to avoid buy as many books as I bought in 2022. I'm sort of a victim of the industry, maybe a victim of BookTube, maybe a victim of the bookish world. I don't know. We're just all victims, aren't we? I hope that you have a great reading, and Christmas is lurking around the corner very soon. I'm working on my top 10 fiction reading list of this year. Wait for that. It's going to be a great and amazing video, I promise. And I see you soon on this channel, and bye.